Long ago, in a valley nestled between towering mountains, there lay a village hidden from the world. This village, called Valeshire, was steeped in tradition and ruled by ancient laws passed down through generations. The most powerful of these traditions was the bound oath, a sacred vow that tied two souls together, not for love, but for the benefit of the village and the balance of nature itself. The legend said that long ago, the first chieftain of Valeshire struck a pact with the spirits of the mountains. In exchange for protection and fertile land, the village would offer its finest daughters and sons to be bound in matrimony under the gaze of the spirits. This union was not of choice, but of destiny, with the fates of the chosen sealed by the mountain winds. It was believed that the bound oath would bring harmony to the valley, ensuring prosperity for the village and peace for the spirits. Every generation, on the night of the harvest moon, the village seer would consult the winds to discover which two souls would be united. The ritual was revered, and none dared defy it, for to break the bound oath was to invite ruin upon the village. But this year, the winds whispered differently. Mira stood at the edge of the forest, gazing up at the jagged peaks of the mountains, their tops obscured by mist. The village had been buzzing with excitement for weeks in anticipation of the bound oath ceremony, but Mira felt only dread. She had always dreamed of leaving Valeshire, of escaping the narrow life that awaited her here. But the seer had spoken, and her name had been called. Mira had been bound to Oren, the village's fiercest hunter. Oren was strong, quiet, and obedient to the village's ways, but Mira could see the darkness in his eyes, the burden he carried of being tied to a tradition he neither questioned nor understood. They had exchanged only a few words since the announcement, and Mira felt as if a veil had fallen between them, thick and impenetrable. On the night of the ceremony, the entire village gathered beneath the ancient oak tree in the center of Valeshire. The wind howled through the mountains, stirring the flames of the torches that lined the village square. The seer stood before Mira and Oren, her weathered face impassive as she began the ritual. "The spirits have spoken," the seer intoned. "You, Mira of Valeshire, and you, Oren of Valeshire, are bound by the sacred oath. You are no longer two but one, tied by fate to protect the village, to uphold the balance, and to live as one until your final breath." As the seer draped a woven veil over their joined hands, Mira felt a strange chill crawl up her spine. The whispers of the wind seemed louder now, almost as if they were trying to speak to her. She glanced at Oren, whose face was unreadable, his jaw set tight in stoic resignation. But beneath the surface, Mira sensed something hidden, something he would not or could not reveal. The ceremony concluded with the tying of a knot in the veil, symbolizing the eternal bond between Mira and Oren. As the village cheered and danced in celebration, Mira's heart grew heavy. She had hoped that perhaps the bound oath was a superstition, a tradition too old to hold power in the present day. But as the knot was tied, she felt an unseen force wrap around her, binding her more tightly than any fabric ever could. That night, after the festivities died down and the villagers returned to their homes, Mira and Oren stood in their new dwelling, silent. The air between them was thick with tension. Oren finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "I did not want this either," he said, his back turned to her as he stared out the window toward the forest. Mira let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Then why didn't you refuse?" she asked, stepping toward him, though still keeping her distance. Oren turned to face her, his eyes hard. "Because to refuse would be to defy the spirits, and to defy them means death. For us, for the village." Mira bit her lip. She had heard the stories. Those who tried to break the bound oath often met tragic ends, disappearing into the mountains or falling victim to mysterious illnesses. But could the spirits truly have such control over their lives? Was their fate truly sealed by an unseen force? Days passed, and though they lived together, Mira and Oren remained distant. Mira spent her time wandering the forest near the village, seeking solace in the trees, while Oren threw himself into his hunting, rarely speaking to her. The weight of the bound oath hung over them like a shadow, unspoken but ever present. One evening, as Mira sat by the river that wound its way through the forest, she heard the whispers again, those same whispers that had haunted her during the ceremony. Only this time, they were clearer. The wind stirred the leaves, and in the rustling she heard a voice. "Break the veil. Free yourself." Startled, Mira stood and looked around, but there was no one in sight. The voice came again, this time more insistent. "Free yourself. The veil hides the truth." Heart pounding, Mira hurried back to the village, her mind racing. Could the bound oath be broken? Could the veil truly be the key? That night, she confronted Oren. "There's something wrong with this," Mira said, pacing in front of the fire as Oren sat sharpening his blade. "The whispers? They've been speaking to me." Oren glanced up at her, his expression darkening. "What whispers?" "The wind. It's telling me that the veil hides something, that we're not meant to be bound like this." Oren's hand tightened around the hilt of his knife. "You're imagining things. The bound oath is sacred. We can't defy it. But what if the spirits are trying to tell us something? What if there's more to this than we know?" Mira's voice grew desperate. "What if the veil is a lie?" Oren stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "You're talking about breaking the oath. Do you know what that means?" "I don't care," Mira shouted, her frustration boiling over. "I didn't choose this. Neither of us did. And I refuse to live the rest of my life bound to a fate that doesn't belong to me." Oren's jaw clenched, and for a moment Mira thought he might argue. But then, to her surprise, he let out a long breath and looked away. "You're not the only one who's heard the whispers," he admitted quietly. Mira's eyes widened. "What?" "I've heard them too. Every time I'm in the forest, every time I'm alone, they speak to me. But I thought it was just my mind playing tricks." Mira stepped closer, her voice softening. "Then we have to find out the truth. We have to know what the whispers mean." For a long moment, Oren was silent, his eyes flickering with an inner conflict. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we'll find out." The next morning, they set out for the mountains, determined to seek answers. As they climbed higher, the wind grew stronger, carrying with it the faintest of whispers, urging them onward. After hours of climbing, they reached a hidden cave, one that neither of them had ever seen before. The entrance was marked with ancient carvings, symbols of the spirits that protected the valley. Inside, the air was cold and damp, and the walls were lined with shimmering crystals. At the far end of the cave, a large stone altar stood, and atop it, draped in a tattered veil, was an old scroll. Mira and Oren approached it cautiously, the whispers growing louder with each step. "The veil hides the truth," the wind whispered. Mira reached out and lifted the veil, revealing the scroll underneath. As she unrolled it, her heart raced. The scroll told a different story than the one they had been taught. The bound oath, it seemed, was not a gift from the spirits, but a curse placed upon the village by an ancient king who sought to control the people of Valeshire. The veil was a symbol of their bondage, a tool to keep them obedient. Mira's hands trembled as she read aloud. "The spirits did not bless this union. They weep for the souls bound by the oath. To break the veil is to break the curse." Oren stared at the scroll, his face pale. "We've been living a lie." Mira looked at him, determination burning in her chest. "We can end it. We can free ourselves." Together they returned to the village, the weight of the truth heavy on their shoulders. That night, as the wind howled through the valley, they stood before the ancient oak tree where the bound oath had been sealed. In their hands, they held the veil from the altar. With a deep breath, Mira tore the veil in half, the fabric unraveling in her hands. As the veil disintegrated, the wind seemed to scream, swirling around them in a furious gust. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the wind stilled, and a deep silence fell over the valley. The whispers were gone. The bound oath was broken. Mira and Oren stood side by side, free at last from the curse that had bound them. The village would no longer be ruled by ancient lies, and they would no longer be tied to a fate they did not choose. Together, they would forge a new path, one built on truth, not tradition. And as they walked back to their home, hand in hand, the spirits of the mountains watched over them, whispering no longer.